In this part of the Advanced Persistent Threat Detection and Threat Hunting with ACKLOG series, we will look into DNS Session Activity Detection. DNS Session Activity Detection is easier and less likely to produce false positives compared to DNS Beacon Activity Detection. That's because session activity is much more frequent than beacon activity, and thus it is easier to differentiate it from the normal traffic. Let's illustrate a DNS session interaction with Sliver Command and Control Framework. As you can see, the speed of interaction with the foothold system is much higher compared to the beacon activity we observed in the previous video. That's why it is a perfect candidate to detect with real-time alert infrastructure of ACKLOG. In the previous video, we used scheduled alerts to detect DNS beacon activity. In cases where we can identify certain activities in shorter time windows, we should prefer using real-time alerts. Real-time alerts are much faster in detection because they process the log messages in real time and before they are indexed to be searched. In this real-time alert, we process log messages which has a length field for the DNS query and with a value greater than 100. This kind of a field usually does not exist in DNS log messages, but we can enrich log messages with ACKLOG's parser and transformer mechanisms. You can refer to the previous video to see the parsing configuration for our DNS logs. In that configuration, you can see that we have DNS question name field for length calculation. We excluded a source IP since we know that it is our ISP DNS server's IP address. In the aggregation part of the real-time alert, we use count aggregator and with a threshold greater than 20 for the time window that is defined below. We need to use partition feature of the real-time alerts for our purposes here. That's because we want to identify frequent DNS activities per source IP. When our alert is triggered, we can assume that the relevant source IP is a foothold system for a potential APT activity. Now, let's create a DNS session activity and see if our real-time alert will be triggered. It looks like this source IP is sending frequent DNS requests. We can focus on the activities relevant to this IP address to make sure if it is really an attacker's foothold in our network. Real-time alerting is one of our strongest weapons in our arsenal. However, a security analyst must perform threat hunting activities as well. Threat hunting is basically performed by iterative search activities, and it has its own benefits such as being flexible in changing the threshold values and getting acquainted with the regular network activities. The effective threat hunting search queries can be used in the scheduled alerts or establish the basis for real-time alerts. So, let's give it a try with a couple of search queries to identify potential DNS session activities in our network. We see a lot of requests for this domain name. Observing large numbers of DNS queries with the same high-level domain name but many different subdomain names is a strong indication for a DNS session activity. In this example threat hunting activity, we will try to identify potentially compromised systems by grouping the number of DNS requests per source IP address for short periods of time. With this analytic query and ACKLOG's visualization capabilities, we identified the same source IP address with frequent DNS queries in a short time period. That's all for identifying DNS session activities. See you in other advanced persistent threat detection and threat hunting scenarios with ACKLOG.